Welcome to Voices of Adoption, where we share unique perspectives, actionable advice, and meaningful stories of birth parents, adoptees, adoptive families, and other members of the adoption community. I'm Donna Pope, Executive Director of Heart to Heart Adoptions.
And I'm Nathan Gwilliam, founder and former CEO of Adoption.com.
Together, we've been part of thousands of adoption journeys over the past 25 years, and we're so glad you're here.
Let's begin today's conversation.
Hi, Liz. Good to have you here. Welcome to Voices of Adoption.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Donna.
Well, it's good, but you've got an amazing story. You're an adoptee, and you're also a writer, and you do things through healing through writing. So we really want to get to that, and we want to make sure people have the opportunity to reach out to you if they want healing through writing. But let's start with your story. So tell us about your adoption story.
Sure. So I was born, I'm a domestic infant adoptee. I was born in 1977 and adopted in New Jersey, closed adoption. And it was a closed adoption. So I didn't have a lot of information. I also have an older brother who was adopted about 14 months earlier than he's 14 months older than I was. So we're pretty close in age. And we always grew up knowing that we were adopted. My parents didn't make it a secret. So I can't remember not knowing. And the way we referred to it as kids growing up was that, sort of our childhood understanding of it was that we came from someone else's stomach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we just kind of stopped talking about adoption, and as I got into my teenage years, I was a really sad and emotionally overwhelmed teenager. I just felt a lot of things all the time and couldn't contain them. And I cried a lot. And I didn't understand why, but I knew that I had all these really intense feelings. And so, that was the point in time at which I started writing. I had a really smart teacher and coach who saw that I was in pain, saw that I was going through some stuff, saw that I was constantly overwhelmed by my emotions, and suggested that I start writing, which, at 14 years old, I thought was the stupidest thing in the world because, at 14, you know everything, right? And so, and then, we had another conversation, and he shared a poem of his with me, and he told me this whole story about why he wrote this poem and what it meant. And something sort of shifted in me in that conversation. And I thought, oh, maybe this isn't so dumb. Maybe there's something to this. And so I got a notebook and I started writing what I, call my really secret poems. Poems that were just for me. There was just I carried that book around in my backpack, and anytime I felt like that surge of emotion, I would grab my pen and I would grab my notebook and I would just write until I felt better.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there because I want to learn a little more about that. First of all, I want to clarify, you never have ever reached out or connected with your biological parents, have you?
I have. You know what? I did not have that. So because I'm in a closed adoption, I had no access to any records. And then fast forward another number of years, and it was in my late 30s when I really hit a wall in my life. And I realized that if I didn't figure out what was going on underneath with me, that I wasn't going to move forward in my life. And it was at that point that I started the first time that I actually wrote about being adopted and started to understand the impact that being adopted had had on my life and had influenced so many of the patterns that I recognized that I was, going through. Because one of the things that I recognized at that point in time was that I had all of these really bad relationship patterns, and that I had all this stuff in my life that had been unfinished. And I got the copy of my birth certificate on my 40th birthday. So on my 40th birthday, I was able to find out who my first mom was. And a few days later, I was able to figure out what I wanted to say to her and make contact. And when she finally wrote back to me, she said, I've been waiting for this day for 40 years. And I'm so glad you reached out to me. And I want to, tell you anything you want to know. And that's a thing that I had always known my whole life. I knew that if I ever found her, or if I ever wanted to find her or tried to find her, that she would want to know me.
Why did you think that? Because there are situations and stories where that's not the case.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that I think, and I know that our bodies hold a lot of wisdom, and we have to, it's the job of any of us to learn to listen to that wisdom. I really tap into it, but I think that I just knew on like a cellular, or deep subconscious level, because of whatever messaging had come through her before we were separated, that she loved me, that she was thinking about me. It's just a knowing that I had. I can't explain it in any other way. It was just, just a deep intuition that I had, that I just knew. And so, although it was nerve wracking on one level to figure out what I was going to say to her, right, when I first reached out to her, I also knew that it was okay, right? I knew that it was okay, and that it was confirmed when she wrote back to me. So,
yeah. So how did it go when you said, let's get together?
Yeah, so at the time, actually, I was in Utah. So I lived in Utah for 6 years. I'm not there anymore, but so at the time in 2017, I was in Utah, and she's still in New Jersey, but she had gone back to her, she'd gotten divorced and gone back to her maiden name when she got divorced. And she told me that was so that it would be easier for me to find her if I ever tried to look for her. And so we started talking that summer in July of 2017. I happened to be back in New York visiting family, and had plans with my best friend. And long story short, the plans shifted from the original plan, and she lives in New Jersey, and she was like, do you think you can come to Jersey and meet me instead? Because this, that, and the other. And I have to go get, she had to go get her kids and things. And so I said, okay, sure. I was like, let me just make sure I can borrow a car to get there. And I borrowed my mom's car. And as I was driving over the outer bridge into New Jersey, I realized that the restaurant that I was meeting her at was in the same town that my first mom is in. And so when I pulled into the parking lot of the restaurant, I pulled out my phone and got on Google Maps and put my first mom's address into Google Maps, and realized that she was 5 minutes away from where we would be. And so I sent her a text message, and I said, this is completely out of the blue, very last minute, but I happened to be at such and such restaurant with my friend Kathleen. And if you'd like to meet, maybe get coffee or dessert or something later, and meet in person, I'm here, and I would love to get together. And so, and then we had dinner, and I was waiting, she gonna respond. And she did, and she said, oh my God, yes, absolutely. I can meet you at whatever time. And
so I'm curious, there's a lot of things I'm curious about. First of all, let's stick with the story and ask, did you talk with your adoptive family about this, and how did they feel about the reunion?
Yeah, so this is a good question and a complicated one, and this whole experience, right? Our whole experience of as adopted people, in adoptive families is so complicated. And it took me about 2 years before I told my parents. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, they had said to me throughout my life that they would support me if I wanted to find her. And, I'm sure that's true. But I was living a couple thousand miles away, and I was in the middle of working on my PhD. And I was trying to navigate this very new relationship with my mother, the woman who had given birth to me and the reason I exist. And it felt bigger to me than something that I could talk to them on the phone about. It just didn't feel like a phone conversation. And also it was something that I needed time to process, right? I didn't want to have to further complicate something that was already pretty complicated. And I was giving myself the time and the space.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back, I want to go back to when you were 14 years old.
Yeah.
Because when you were 14 years old, you started writing. I want to explore that just a little bit more with you. What was it inside of you that you needed to express?
Well, I think the best way that I can explain that is by sharing the first poem that I ever wrote with you, which is The Little Girl Inside of Me. And it comes up in my award-winning solo show, Unmothered, because that was very much my way into healing, was going back to all these old poems, which we could talk about later. But so the poem goes like this: alone and confused, shy and scared, hoping for tomorrows that will never come, dreaming impossible dreams, big sad eyes looking out at the world, looking and searching, wondering what's to be. That's the little girl inside of me. And so, I just had this, in Unmothered, the way that I describe it is I felt a deep emptiness that I thought would never be filled. And so I wrote. I just felt sad all the time. I felt scared. I felt confused. And the only thing that helped was when I put my pen to paper and I just let whatever the emotions I had come out in words on the page. And it wasn't anything I thought, it wasn't like I thought about what I was writing. I was just writing, and it was just coming out because I needed to express all of this deep pain and grief that I felt, that I had inside of me, but couldn't name.
I want to touch on the Unmothered. Now, talk us a little about what you're meaning by that and where you've gone with that.
Yeah, so Unmothered is so it's capital M capital othered, and the title is really important to the in the context of the show, because the dashes represent the separations and the disruption that are inherent in adoption, right? The separation between first mothers and babies, or families of origin and babies, the separation between adoptees and the adoptive family, our adoptive families. And that adoption makes unmothers of both first mothers and adoptive mothers, because many adoptive moms come to adoption because of infertility. And so it's, rhetorically, it's representative of all those disruptions and separations. And then, of course, the disruptions and separations that happen across the lifespan when we don't have access to our birth records and our family histories and knowledge of our ethnicities and ancestry and all of those things. And so that's why the title is what it is. And also just the concept of unmothering. So the show came out of, it was part of my dissertation work, and it came out of my desire to use writing as a tool for healing and embodied performance as a research method to show that we could use creative tools to help people process and heal embodied trauma by making myself the subject of the research and by telling this story out loud in public. And the way that I did that was I went back to all of my early poetry. This was poetry from my teens and 20s and 30s that, as I just said, told me so much about my grief and my pain, and kind of give me what I will call the emotional glue of the piece. And then I wrote chunks of personal narrative to link the poems together. And the show itself is told through poetry, narrative, and movement. And it's really about the internal experience of being adopted, but it also tells a little bit about my reunion, right? A little bit of the story that I just told you about, getting my birth certificate on my 40th birthday. And part of the other part of the intent, besides my own healing, was to be able to use the show as a vehicle for conversation, right? To be able to open up conversation around a complicated and difficult subject. And, ultimately it was really about, I broke a lot of silences. I said a lot of things that I had never said out loud before. First on paper by writing, right? And then literally out loud in performance. And those are things that have, writing and performing have been tools that have served me well and have saved me for most of my life, because as a teenager, I also did a lot of community theater, because it was easier for me to
be someone else.
Yes, exactly. To be someone else, to put my emotions into, and to live someone else's life for as long as I was playing a character in a play. Right. And I was good at it. Right. So it made me feel safe. It made me feel safe. It made me feel accepted. It made me feel like something made sense. Right. But then when I got, later in life, it became really important to me to tell my own story on my own terms. And so that's what Unmothered is really about, being able to tell my story on my own terms. And then by extension, provide healing and support to others who might be interested in telling their story, or at least starting to put language to their experiences. One of the biggest things I hear from other adoptees is how when they see my show, that everything I've said is what they have felt their whole life, but could never put words to.
So I'm curious if your brother ever kind of experienced some of the same feelings that you did.
This is one of the parts of my story that's complicated and painful. I'm sure that he has, but we have never talked about it. And we, now as adults, I'm 48, he'll be 50 in a couple of months, and we don't currently have a relationship. And that's because I have felt the need to find my biological heritage and meet my first mom and answer some of those questions for myself. And I think that he feels like that's a betrayal to our parents, but he has never had that conversation with me, right? He has never reached out to me at any point.
Your parents, they have a relationship with him, but you don't. Do your parents ask the same questions that he has?
My parents, I like to joke that I've dragged them kicking and screaming out of the fog. But, because they have always been, they're beautiful people. They're very loving. They're very supportive. They have always been 100% supportive of anything and everything that I've done with my life and in my life. And I had to have all of these really difficult conversations with them where I had to explain and sort of take them through. And then I said, okay, then, if you would like to read the script before you come to see the show, I'm happy to send it to you. And also, you don't have to come see the show if you're not ready. I can send you, there is a recording of the original version, which is not a very good recording, but it had to be part of my dissertation. And I said I could send you the recording after the fact, and you can watch it when you're ready, and then we can talk about it. No, we're coming. Okay. But what the show has done is it has enabled me to have better conversations with them, and it has allowed them over time to start asking questions. And they're, slowly over the years getting better at it.
Let's suppose you were talking to an adoptive family now, just like you were talking to your parents, And they were really curious as to how to initiate and move forward those conversations. What would you say?
I think being curious is so important, right? And that's in my migrating toward wholeness process. That's the making space to heal piece of it, is that in relation to trauma healing, it's about being curious about what's stuck and beginning to express it. And so part of curiosity is asking questions. So like, for example, if your kid is writing or drawing, like doing something creative, maybe look at that and ask them questions about it. Because if somebody had seen that first poem that I wrote, The Little Girl Inside of Me, they might have asked me questions. They might have been able to say, why do you feel so alone? Right? Why are you confused? What are you confused about? And then I might have been able to start to articulate.
Could you have answered that question?
I don't know, but nobody ever, we never had that conversation. So the advice to other families is to keep the conversation going. Don't stop talking about it. Right?
So I'm curious why, as an adoptive mom, knowing that I don't know that I'm any better than your parents were at being curious. And I have to think, why am I not? And honestly, there's a certain amount of resistance that said, I don't know that I really want to know.
Right.
And that's a little scary, because you go, why don't I really want to know? And that because it reflects back on my own insecurities, my own fears.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like that you use the word resistance. I would say that that's true. And it's true for my parents. It's true for a number of adoptive parents that I have been in conversation with over the years. And I'm glad that you named that, Donna, that you said, then like that you maybe don't want to know. Right. And it's, one of the things I came across when I was in my research was there are a lot of adoptive moms who chose international adoption because they didn't want to have to deal with
the birth parents
and the family. Right. And so like, I think that's proof of what you're saying, that we don't want to know. And it's what Betty Jean Lifton wrote about as as if, right? Adoption asks us, like just inherent in the structure of it is that it asks that adoptive families act as if the child didn't come from somewhere else, because it's easier. It's easier not to ask questions. It's easier not to deal with our own insecurities. It's easier not, to open those closets and dig in the, in the dark corners for the things. But then what happens is a lack of connection.
That's an interesting state, because on the one hand, I would say, I think one of the things we do as adoptive parents is we want to act as if, because we want to believe that that child is as connected to us as if they were biologically born. We want to believe that.
Yeah.
And acting and bringing up all these issues is saying that's not true.
Right. Right. It's it's what I call having to hold space for the both and, right? Because so many of us, because our culture teaches us there's so much binary thinking in many of the ways that we go through school and that we're raised, that things are either or, and it simplifies life in a lot of ways when we can have that binary kind of thinking. However, in adoption and many things, right, there's a lot of nuance, and we have to hold space for the both and, right? I can both be grateful for the life that I have had in the family that I was raised in, and I can still feel a lot of grief and sadness over the family that I didn't get to know.
And I, as an adoptive mom, can be both connected and feel ownership and feel belonging with my adoptive children, and recognize there's a part of them that's separate than me.
Yes. And I'm gonna push back a little bit on the word ownership.
I wanted you to, and I used it for that purpose because that is absolutely true. And the ownership feeling is a tough thing, because you want to think my child, you want to think my husband, my wife, you want to think ownership. And so now we're to the both and.
Yeah.
We want to feel that connectedness. This is my connectedness, and it's not.
Right. So for me, I like to think about that in terms of relationship. How do we be in relationship, and how do we create relational healing around that? Because as adoptees, we have been the object in the story our whole lives, right? We were literally handed over. We had no agency or choice in that decision. It was a decision that was made for us, not by us. And so we become an object. And then it takes a lifetime of work to become the subject, which is also one of the parts of the Migrating Toward Wholeness process, is about becoming the subject so that we can shift out of that mode of ownership, right? That and into relationship, both with ourselves and other people. But it takes a lot of work, and it takes conversations like this, because we want to be connected, and you as a parent want to be connected to your adopted children. And there is a sense of ownership, because the entire relationship is transactional at its origin, right?
Well, and that is true, but it's deeper than that. And we all know they're my children.
Yeah.
And I am their mom. And
yeah.
And that's far beyond transactional. That has now become our identity. We are a family. And we want that. At the same time,
and there's also another family that they're part of. There's another family that I'm part of. And so there needs to be space for all of that to coexist. I actually wrote a couple of years ago an article that was published in Adoption and Culture, where I wrote about having, my two moms, and how growing up, if there had been space for both of them to coexist for me side by side, then things may have been different for me in some ways. I think that I would have felt more comfortable communicating and opening up and actually connecting
with your adoptive mom.
Yeah. And I love my mom, and I have a good relationship with both my mom and my dad, but I didn't feel like there was space for my other mother in that relationship, because I felt like I had to not hurt my mom's feelings or take care of her feelings. And so I didn't, I wasn't able to talk about her. But then by extension, she also didn't ask me questions, right? So like if she had come to me and said, if you ever want to talk about your other mom, I want you to know that that's okay. And of course my parents had like very minimal information, right? Like they weren't given any information, honestly.
I of course have a little more unique situation, because I was so intimately involved with both the biological parents of my children, and we're still very close. Well, with the first one, the second one has died, but I'm still very close to them. And so it's given us a lot of freedom to be able to talk. And quite honestly, I've wondered if I've talked too much. I don't know. I've wondered if I've talked too much. So it's a difficult balance.
Yeah.
Have I said to him, well, I'm taking care of you, and not let them feel that connectedness as much. And so it's a difficult balance. I'm not sure what the answer is.
And I think it's part of the human experience, right? And it's going to be different for each one of us in each of our families for myriad reasons, right? But I think being able to name it, right, and hold space for it is really important, because then it allows the relationships to continue to grow and the connections to flourish, as opposed to being cut off. And I'll use my family as an example. Part of the reason that I don't have a relationship with my brother is because there was no constant communication, and there was no space for the curiosity around the internal experience for all of us to be able to say, like, listen, you are our kids, but you come from other people. And if you ever have questions or curiosity about that, please come to us. Please let us help you work through that. But that never happened.
So you said, I still am thinking about the unmothering, and I know how it's written. It's you, and dash, and an M, and then a dash, and then other. Can you one more time explain to us what that means?
Yes. So the reason that the show is called Unmothered with the dashes is that the dashes represent the separations and the disruptions that happen in adoption. The separations between babies and first mothers and families of origin, the separation between adoptees and adoptive parents, the separation between adoptees and our heritage and origins and ancestry, and also the fact that adoption makes unmothers of first mothers. They become unmothers when they relinquish, and adoptive moms are unmothered when they have issues of infertility that require them, I wouldn't say require, but, that prompt them to choose adoption as an alternative, right? Which is the conventional wisdom, right? It's like, oh, you're infertile, well, you should just adopt.
Do you think you can get the dashes out of there?
Well, I mean, my hope is that the dashes, over time, they, those things will always be true. But I think every time I get to have a conversation like this, and every time I get to perform it, and I get to have a different conversation with my parents, with the people I love, those separations and those distances get a little shorter.
No, that's really good. So as we kind of wrap up, I want to ask you 3 questions.
Sure.
Now you're an adoptee, so we're going to leave that one for last. But if you were talking to birth moms and birth fathers, and you were to have an honest conversation with them, what would you say?
I would want them to know that I recognize the challenges that they face, right? And that none of these decisions are ever easy or made lightly, and that I wish that they had more support. I wish that they had more.
What would that support look like?
A lot of times that support is financial, right? Like, we don't have a really strong social safety net here. And most of the people, and if you are familiar with Gretchen Sisson's research, so much of what she has really extensively put out in the world is around the fact that, like, most of the birth mothers that are relinquishing wouldn't choose that if they had alternatives. And most of the time, it's a temporary financial crisis. And so support looks like financial help. Support looks like stable housing, especially when we talk about foster care situations. That's like most of the kids that end up in foster care and then adopted through foster care, it's because they have unstable housing.
And yet we don't have the support system in our nation.
Nope,
to manage that. It is very tenuous, many of the circumstances.
Yeah.
But you would say, I still get it. I still get why you make the choice.
Of course. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm a very empathetic person, and I've done enough of my own deep internal healing work, in addition to enough research and enough understanding of all of this, all of the factors in play. And I also, I wish that they didn't have to make that choice, right? That
I'm curious as to how this conversation went with your own mom, your own birth mom.
Yeah, she's been very honest with me, and she wanted to keep me. She told me that. She said, and she has apologized multiple times over the years and said, I wish I had been stronger, because she was kind of between a rock and a hard place. She did not have the support of her family. She did not have the financial security, that would have enabled her to keep me.
What would you advise, and what would you say to adoptive parents?
I'd say to adoptive parents, keep being curious. Make sure that you're leaving space for the other family in your life, even if you don't know them, even if you have no access to them, because I guarantee that their child is thinking about that other family, and they may not have words for it, just like I didn't know how to ask the questions. So making space for curiosity. And there's a lot of great books now that are available to be able to use to enter into those conversations, and these are books that are written by and for adoptees. These are things that like didn't exist when I was a kid that I think, would have opened up a whole new world of possibilities for conversations, right? Because you don't have to make it up. You can read the book together and then you can ask the question, right? So just stay curious and stay open, and work against your resistance, right? If you're not curious, ask yourself why,
and be honest with the answer.
Yeah,
and it's hard to sometimes be honest because I'm scared. I'm just scared.
And if you need support about how to have those conversations, find the support you need. That could be a therapist. That might be a clergy person who can help, be a thought partner. That might be someone like me who does individual and family coaching using my process to help people have better conversations, because we use creative writing as a tool for unearthing the stuff.
Yeah.
And using it as an entry point into deeper conversations and better communication so that we have that relational healing.
And that does take us to the adoptee, how we work with them.
Yeah. So for adoptees, you're not alone. And I tell this to adoptees all the time. I see you, I hear you, I understand you. Your story, and so many adoptees that I've worked with, despite our differences in identity and geographical locations and all those things, those external things, our internal experiences are always the same. It's uncanny, and so also seek support. Healing is possible. There's a reason why you feel the way that you feel, and there's nothing wrong with you. And there's a whole community available to you. So find the resources, find the support. There are books, there are podcasts, there are people like me that you can reach out to and connect, so that you are not alone in the experience.
Liz, thank you for this conversation. It's been a joy. And thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me. This has been lovely.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Adoption. I'm Donna Pope.
And I'm Nathan William. Every voice in the adoption triad deserves to be heard and understood.
Visit voicesofadoption.org to subscribe and access additional resources. And then join us next time as we continue to build bridges through conversation.